It's time now for Your Story, a presentation of oral histories of everyday past experiences of local residents, highlighting changes in technology, employment, schooling, growing up as a child, and much more. Your Story is funded by a Michigan Humanities Council Heritage Grant and also made possible by Right Start UP. Here is your host, Linda Graham.
Good morning and welcome back, everyone, to the Your Story Project show. We've been walking down memory lane as we listen to clips from some of the oral history videos that have come out of the Your Story Project. Last week, if you remember, Sarah Lottie Cham and I talked about the differences over time in childhood and schooling by listening to some of the Your Story excerpts. We also had a visit from Houghton High School senior Megan, who spoke of her current experiences as a student. She also had participated in the Your Story project herself, and she told us about how the process of making a digital history went for her. Today, on our third episode, it is going to be about the Finnish-American heritage culture identity. Because it was a common theme among a number of the Your Story Project videos, which you can view on the Right Start UP website. And that website is rightstartup.org/yourstory. To shed some light on this subject, Sarah's not here, I welcome a very special guest today, Jim Kurtti, Director of the Finnish-American Heritage Center, and he's also the Honorary Consul of Finland to the Upper Peninsula. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Linda. Nice to be with you.
Glad to have you here. And just to let everyone know, we welcome calls from the listening audience today. If you have any comments or questions for us, please give us a call. You can join our conversation. Just give us a call at 482-7700, and you'll get to speak with us on the air. Now, Jim, I understand that you've been serving as the cultural advisor for this Your Story project. Can you tell us how that came about?
Well, I was approached by Sarah, and she was talking about how they were working with little brothers and wondering if we also wanted to collaborate with them at the Heritage Center. We were very excited to get involved from the onset because of our past experiences with oral histories and how important they are and how meaningful they became.
That sounds very, very interesting. And to hear these clips that they've compiled, it is very, very interesting. We closed out the last episode on schooling with a clip of you speaking about the importance of education among Finnish, both in Finland up to the present and among Finnish immigrants to this area in the past. We found a quote from a Finnish Your Story participant that supports what you said. We're going to play both that quote and one from the participant. Let's give it a listen.
I think that there's something that is inherently in the Finnish psyche that values education, and the fact that they were very literate people when they came over, and there was a lot of stress put on. It was the influence of the Lutheran Church that people should be educated. In Finland today, the teachers are held in high regard, and they say it's more difficult to become a teacher than it is an engineer.
Education was stressed, definitely stressed, very strongly. The other was doing your best because you were Finnish. It did not mean, it wasn't taught in a way that you're better than anyone because you're Finnish, but you must do your best because you are Finnish.
Jim, can you explain a bit what you mean when you say that the Finns who immigrated to this area valued education?
They did. It was very much in their culture to value education, and I think that it would be important to mention that it's the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, and part of what the Lutheran Church did in Finland because of that was that people were required to read and write and to know the catechism. It was you had to read and write so that you knew the catechism and you knew you could read the Bible. And you couldn't own land, you couldn't vote, and you couldn't get married if you couldn't read or write. So that was very much instilled into the Finnish cultural landscape, that education was the ticket. It was the way to succeed. And, you know, as it went along and reading material was available, Finns were voracious readers of newspapers, for example, and still Finland has the highest use of libraries in the world.
Well, that's fantastic. Did they have a part in shaping education in this area then over time?
Well, yeah, I think the Finns, just by sheer numbers, have had a part in everything. But certainly, when we think of some of those educators that really stand out in our mind, many of those were Finnish-American women who really were teachers 24/7. You know, they instilled in us the appreciation of education, and they instilled in us this sense of citizenship, and that education was a very important part of being a good citizen.
Mm-hmm. Now, I learned from Sarah that the Your Story project did not specifically target Finns to do all these oral histories. The students could interview whoever they wanted and choose from anyone from the list that they had for the community members that were interested. But I also noticed that there are a lot of Finns in those videos, so I suppose that has to do, well, to be expected that there's so many people with Finnish backgrounds in this area. For example, listen to this clip about people referring to their Finnish ancestors.
I'm a full-blooded Finn. My mother was a full-blooded Finn, and my dad come from Finland. My mother was born in this country, though, and my dad come to this country in 1903.
My dad, his parents came from Finland, and they had a real weird name, which I can't even pronounce hardly, but they changed it when they moved to Michigan. And they came to Tapiola because my grandpa was a farmer.
Jim, do you have any idea about how many people came to this area and are of Finnish descent?
Well, percentage-wise, even in the last census records, it's about 30%. And there are 6 counties in the Upper Peninsula going from Marquette County west to Gogebic County. And these are the only counties in the country where Finns are actually the majority ethnic group.
Oh.
And when you look at Stanton Township, for example, it's the most Finnish per capita township in the country, with 47% of the residents of Stanton Township claim Finnish ancestry. So there's 2 parts. One is that there were a very significant number of Finns settled here, both in real numbers and in percentages, and you know, they have retained this sense of Finnish identity. So even in 2010, when they took the last census, people in great numbers still identified Finnish as their primary or secondary ethnic background.
On that clip, the gentleman said that his family came in 1903. Is that about the time that the most number came, or were there different waves of?
It is. When you talk to scholars about Finnish immigration, there were other times where some Finns came, including in 1638 when they came to New Sweden. But the Great Emigration started in 1865 and went until World War I broke out. So during that period, exceedingly large number of Finns came. In Hancock, they started coming in 1865, and really the height of immigration was right around the turn of the century. And they were coming here basically because there was a lot of work in the mines.
I know my mother's parents, both grandma and grandpa, came in the 1880s, but they came through Canada and then they came down.
Yeah, a great number of the Finns who settled in the Copper Country actually came through Canadian ports.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
So that's the usual route.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, the woman in the clip mentioned that her father changed his name because, like she said, it was hard to pronounce. In the Finnish-American archives, do you see that practice a lot of people changing their names, something more American or shorter? Or?
You know, they wanted to succeed. They were coming with very little, resource, and they wanted to succeed, so they adapted to American life. It wasn't that difficult for Finns because in Finland, until 1923, you didn't have a surname law, and you went by the name of the house you lived in. You were so-and-so of that house. So to come to the States and to change your name, it was quite easy to adapt to that. And so a lot of them did shorten their names. The oddest thing is, though, that many Finnish surnames are compound words. So it's a descriptive word and then a geographic word, like Niemi, which is peninsula, or Mäki, which is hill. They very often dropped the first part and kept the second part, so you have a lot of Mäkis and Niemis. But it makes it very difficult for genealogists because you don't even know what letter your family name began with prior to the change.
Like Kiviranta, right?
Yes, they'd keep Ranta, Ranta.
Yeah, okay. There's also many people around this area who are part Finnish. One parent is Finnish and the other is another nationality. We have a clip about this, and if you want to listen to this and then maybe comment about why the people who are part Finns still maintain the Finnish more so than the other part of the ethnic part.
I was raised in a Finnish community here, and I am half Finn. My dad was Finnish. Obviously, my mother wasn't, but due to community, I consider myself being more Finnish in ethnicity than anything else. She was English and German.
The Finnish part of the family was very important. The Welsh side of the family, my father's, I loved my Welsh grandmother, but we didn't get into history of Wales or things like that.
So, yeah, and this actually harkens to my own experience. My mother was not Finnish, and my father was, and well, look at me now. I don't know why it is. I assume it has a lot of different factors, and one of them is that there's so much prevalence of Finnish culture here that if you have an interest, you have something to attach it to. Mm-hmm. But then the Finns are also known to be sort of people who stick to something, unlike many ethnic groups, like say the Italians or the Polish people. They tended to congregate in urban areas, and the Finns, as soon as they could, they went into the rural areas, and they were they easily developed these little islets where even today there's homes that speak Finnish rather than English.
You say your father was Finn, but your mother wasn't?
My mother was what they call toiskielinen. She was one who spoke a different language, and that was French and Irish. And so when I was a kid, I actually didn't realize I was Finnish because I grew up in Bruce Crossing, where nearly everybody was. And I thought it was sort of really exotic or ethnic to be Irish, because I thought my grandmother was the only one.
Now, I grew up with both Finnish, so it was all Finn everywhere I went. So in this area, the sheer concentration of Finns surely has an impact on the self-identity. I do have another clip where a woman talks about growing up around mostly Finns in Michigan. Here's the clip.
But growing up, you were Finnish, but there were other Finnish people, and your parents still had Finnish friends. So you didn't notice it so much that you were Finnish. But then, after college and starting to teach, and now you're away from this big Finnish families, then you realize there weren't that many Finns. Now I was in a group where I was the only Finnish person. I did insist that my children knew they were Finnish, or part Finnish.
Now, I grew up all Finn, like I said, and all the way through high school, and I joined the Finnish dance group, and I was in the Finnish choir, and I married a Finn, and you know how that goes, so, but that didn't last. But anyway, I wanted my children to learn all the Finnish things, and I kept that. But Jim, you grew up in a mostly Finnish area. Do you experience the similar sentiment? Being Finnish, wasn't it so noticeable because you grew up around that?
There was a prevalence, especially in these small communities. And we're working on a project about the Settlers Co-op in Bruce Crossing, which is 100 years this year. And it makes me remember that as a child, when I went to the co-op store, you were just as apt to hear Finnish as English. You know, so it kind of wrapped around us. And another recollection I have is that we had visitors from Finland about 30 years ago, and the parents couldn't speak any English at all, and the mother started going up and talking to people, and finally her husband said, well, how do you know who speaks Finnish here? And she said, well, here in America, if they have gray hair, they speak Finnish.
Yeah, I guess so. I know my grandmother would not learn Finnish. She just wanted to speak the Finnish language. And I do have one more short clip here that I'd like you to hear.
You know, the neighbors are lots of Finnish people, but lots weren't either. You know, we had a lot of my friends weren't. But since both my parents were, the grandparents all were, there was a lot of Finnish spoken. You know, and my older brother, I guess, could speak it a little bit. My other brother, Bruce, didn't, and I didn't. But I do remember phrases in Finnish, and pronunciation is easy to remember too. But I used to always ask my grandfather to come and eat by saying "Tulga and Sir," man. I still remember that. They used to like to speak Finnish so we could understand them. So that was interesting. But they didn't discourage it, but they didn't encourage it for sure. And
I remember the Finnish, we had to go to church and they spoke in English and then they spoke in Finnish. We'd have to sit through both sermons. And then always, if I had company come over, because my grandmother lived with us and she only spoke Finn, we had to translate what our friends were talking about so Grandma would understand. So I'd always say, let's go outside, please, please, let's go outside. And when I started school, I spoke Finn. How about you, Jim? How was the language? Did you learn it at home, or how did that work?
Yes and no. My grandparents didn't speak English, and so when we were on the farm, which we were there quite often, it was quite close to us, somehow we understood each other. They spoke to us in Finnish and we answered in English, and so there was like a passive understanding. And it would be interesting, I think, to go back in time to really watch that and really observe how that actually worked. But I'm the youngest of four, and I think that my older siblings, especially my brother, probably knew more than I did. But you know, because it's day to day, you don't watch it in the way that you should. You can only rely on your memory. And how did that work exactly? But yeah, they spoke to us in Finnish.
Oh, and you in English?
Well, I think we mostly answered in English. Although, you know, when you start putting it all together, you realize, even like my sons who are in their 30s now, and when we start talking about all the words and phrases that they know, it actually is quite a body of information. So I don't think we consciously figure that out. We communicate. Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, I had a younger brother, 9 years younger than me, and Grandma just adored him. But it's funny because he spoke to her in English. And she would answer him in Finn, and he understood that. I mean, that's like, I can understand what you're talking about. Well, we're going to take a few minutes here for a break. We got to get back to our commercials here. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the Finnish-American culture, what people do around here to show that they are still rooted in the Finnish-American customs. And this program is being brought to you by Right Start UP. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Your Story Project, when today we're talking about Finnish-American culture. And we've learned that there are some Finnish words still hanging around out there in the UP. But in addition to the Finnish language, what are some other aspects of Finnish-American culture that are noticeable around here? I have a clip from a Your Story participant explaining what his Finnish heritage means to him.
Doing things that they wouldn't have been doing in Finland, like woods work and stuff. That was a big. That was what my great-grandfather did in Finland, and he brought over much of that, and the hunting and things like that. Yes, those are very big in my life, or have been, and I was brought up that way. I take great pride in being who I am. I realize after making a trip to Finland, in the area where my great-grandfather came from, that it's very, I know now why I was raised the way I was raised.
I know that this was just a short clip, but what is this participant getting at? What part of people's lives in the UP can particularly be referred to as Finnish-American in nature, Jim? Can you help me out here?
Probably not.
Oh, come on. No, you can't.
You know, some of these things are just a little bit undefinable, but I think there's an essence somehow. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of things that, are very intentionally Finnish, and then there are things that are just kind of in our DNA. And what the gentleman was talking about, I think, is sort of that DNA thing about how
woodworking.
Finns like to work with their hands, and they like to be, to do things alone and to be quiet and be in the forest. There's something that a Finn would say is very Finnish about all of those traits. Mm-hmm. It's my impression that that's what he was implying when he said he went to Finland and then recognized that this type of personality, these kinds of values that he put on it was something that he had inherited through his Finnish.
Mm-hmm. I know just by being on Facebook, and I've made a lot of Facebook friends in Finland, never been to Finland yet, but the individuals that have befriended me, and then I post pictures of the area, they all say, "Oh, this looks like Finland. You look like you live here in Finland." So the woods, the pine, the lakes, the streams, everything, it reminds them of Finland. But then when I posted about St. Urho's Day, they said, "What is that? We don't have that here in Finland."
Yeah.
And Heikenpäivä.
Yes, Heikenpäivä is not a Finnish event; it's a Finnish-American event.
Right.
Basically, Finns have been here 100 years plus in the Copper Country, and so we have to recognize that Finnish-American culture is a distinct culture, and actually the Finnish language spoken here is a distinct language. It has elements very much rooted in Finland, but we have adapted. We're not in Finland, we're Americans.
Right.
We're Americans with this descriptor Finnish to it. And, we have adapted to our home, our country, and yet we remember our roots. And I think that that's the part that makes Finnish culture work in America, is the fact that, we're not following some strict code. Certainly most of us have lost the language, and but still there's this part that's adaptable and works for us here in this country.
The story that I got from a dear friend of mine, Irene Borma, she told me that when she came over, they had to learn the Declaration of Independence, they had to learn the Pledge of Allegiance, they had to take the citizenship pledge, become an American citizen, and it meant so much to her. She had tears in her eyes and everything. She was so happy to become an American citizen, but yet they keep their Finnish nationality too. All their Finnish, everything they learned from Finland and that their parents had over there, they still have that, but yet they're proud to be American.
Yeah. Well, I think a very good comparison is if you look at Europe, and there's a lot of countries, and that's relatively small landmass, and they keep all their identities. And here in the North America, we can drive for hundreds upon hundreds of miles, including the U.S. and Canada. It's still English, everything is kind of the same, but maybe as people, we need to have regional identities, and we need to have some other identities that kind of make us feel part of a tribe. And I think that makes America a really rich country. When you look at the diversity of our country, not only in the people, but in the geography and the climates, I think it's needed. And I think we here in the Copper Country have, our being here in this country is a pretty short period of time, not only for Finns, but for all the ethnic groups, that celebrating this cultural heritage is a very good way of making us feel that we have some kind of local identity.
I agree. Well, I have one clip. We have to have a laugh here, but this next clip makes me laugh. You got to listen.
They are not known as particularly affectionate people. They always say a Finnish hug is a handshake. So when we grew up, our parents did not tell us, I love you, like these later generations. You assumed that they love you because they took care of you. That was an assumption, but it wasn't, they didn't demonstrate the love as much.
I have to agree with that. I grew up with that. How about you, Jim?
Well, I would almost correct her and say that they were demonstrating it, like she says, but they didn't have the need to also say it.
Right,
because they were proving it. And, I have, in the last decade or so, I've really tried hard to learn how to hug.
We grew up not doing it.
And you even go to Finland now and they hug you and I figure, well, we've got to join the crowd. So,
yeah.
And it's okay, but it isn't in our nature.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a woman said that she was new to a school and the principal took her around as a new teacher and said, well, here's the different ethnic groups and these are the Jewish students and you have to respect this about them, and here's the Polish students and you have to know this about them. And then he pointed to a group of Finnish boys and he said, now those are the Finns, don't touch them, they don't like to be touched.
True. That is true, and I grew up that way. So, and moving on from not hugging to sisu, everybody knows that. It's a word that means Finnish value, and it's well known to people in this area, but does it mean the same thing to all people? We do have a clip here that from Your Story participant of Finnish background, and they're trying to explain what sisu means to them.
Like that word sisu that the Finns use, never giving up, always going on, no matter what the circumstances, you continue on.
I've got that good Finlander sisu. That is guts.
That's true, and I love the idea that now sisu has become sort of mainstream in the UP. It's used by everybody, and I think at least the Finns are quite generous in giving these words away. There's so few Finnish words that have gone beyond the Finnish community that they're happy when this concept of sisu can be embraced by others, and it certainly is one of those things that just builds people up and pushes them to do the right thing. Oddly, though, sisu is a very positive word among Finnish-Americans, but in Finland now there's some question about it because it's been used so much, and maybe in politics in Finland, the very far right have sort of are controlling that word, so sisu can be associated with sort of xenophobia or kind of a nationalistic attitude. So in Finland it doesn't right now have the same positive effect that it has here in the States, and I think that's one of the things we here in America should protect. Mm-hmm. Keep the good in sisu.
Yeah, sisu means the inside fortitude. Yeah. My translation of it. Oh dear. Okay, let's switch from sisu to food. How about food, the Finns? What do you think, Jim? Are the Finns not all about well known for their cuisine?
Well, maybe Finns have developed sisu because of the food.
Fish.
Years ago, we were starting Hakenpäivä, and I told a local Italian merchant that we were having Finnish cuisine, and she just smiled and said, "Isn't that an oxymoron?" The Finnish foodways were pretty simple. Most of the Finns that came here came from poor conditions. They came from, even mostly from northern Finland. And so the diet was meat and potatoes and fish and potatoes and potatoes and potatoes.
Yep.
So the food was pretty bland, but I understand now that the Nordic food trend is the new Mediterranean diet is now the Nordic diet.
Going up in the world.
Going up in the world. So you eat these very basic foods without a lot of complication, and you eat them fresh from your own area.
And it's healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a clip here of a woman experiencing her fondness for what has become a Finnish tradition in cooking.
My favorite food of all time would be pasties. And I didn't make pasties, though, until my mother made them when we were growing up. My mother made pasties. Aunt Marie made pasties. Every Finnish family made pasties. The Cornish people also made pasties. So my Cornish grandmother, or Welsh, made what they called a Cornish pasty. The only difference was the Finns put carrot in their pasty and the Cornish did not.
Jim, can you comment on the relationships that the Finns have developed on the famed pasty in this area?
You want me to weigh in on the great carrot debate?
Yes, and the rutabaga.
And rutabaga, yeah. Well, the pasty is absolutely from the Cornish people, and we're glad that they brought that food tradition to us. But actually, almost every culture has some way that they wrap food in some sort of crust. And the Finns had something similar called piirakka. And of course, potatoes again and meat, two of the staples of Finnish diet. So I think they easily adapted to the utilitarian value of a pasty. It was convenient, it was wrapped in something, it was easy to heat, and my goodness, they sure taste good.
Yeah, and you can take them with you.
Take them with you, send them with your kids to school or to the husband going down in the mines. And
Very, very economical and smart food there. The same Your Story participant has a recollection about Finnish kitchens. She would go with her mother and visit people, and she said they were all immaculate. Listen to this clip.
I have a strong recollection when I was a preschooler going with my Finnish grandmother to have coffee with one of her Finnish lady friends. The Finnish kitchens were sterile. They were so clean, I think you could have operated on the kitchen table. And a lot of it was, they were enameled. Not a wooden table, but a white enameled table, metal. And I remember this from my grandmother. You had to be clean. Every cleanliness was very, very important. Their kitchens were spotless. The other Finnish women that she would go to visit and have coffee with, their kitchens were spotless.
Jim, is this a thing? Did the Finns have a particular hygiene code that you know of when it came to keeping up the kitchen?
I think there was a very strong influence in the culture that you had to be very clean. And if you go to Finland today, that's still so. It's one aspect of Finnish culture I wish we could bring back with great gusto. The Finnish homes tend to be uncluttered. And they tend to be very simple lines, and even today, and the traditional farmhouses were very much that, and everything had to be in order, and everything had to be very clean. That really is true. My two sisters went with us last summer to Finland, and finally, after visiting house after house where there wasn't one thing out of place, my sister said, "I'd just like to see some dust." And so this built-in cultural emphasis on cleanliness still really does exist in Finland, and it was very prevalent here too. I think where people really used to notice it was in the dairy barns, because the women in Finland, the women took care of the barns. And the barns were also immaculate. I was in a barn in Finland once where they had white rag rugs on the floor.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Well, I grew up on a farm, and I know when they sold the milk to the dairy, it had to be very sterilized, and they had to go through it, and that water was so hot, and I remember my grandma putting her hands in that hot, sterilized water. And then the other thing I remember of the cleanliness part, every spring, we had to wipe down every ceiling to floor. That house had to be cleaned out, aired
and
out.
And the barns.
The rugs had to be, the houses, the sauna, we had to do. Everything had to be cleaned out. It was something. Well, now it's time again for another break, and when we do come back, we will be talking about the shifts in the Finnish-American identity over time in the UP, as well as questions of religion and identity among the Finnish-Americans. So we'll be back right after this break. You're listening to Your Story Project, brought to you by Right Start UP. welcome back to segment 3 of Your Story. We are here with Jim Kurtti, director of the Finnish-American Heritage Center and Honorary Consul of Finland to the Upper Peninsula. Jim, I thought we could transition back to our discussion of Finnish-American identity and talk about how that might have changed over time since the first wave of immigrants came over. We do have one clip from the Your Story videos that tells us the story of a couple who came from different backgrounds. The man was Finnish and Lutheran, the woman Italian and Catholic. Listen how that plays out when they decided to get married.
And not only not Finnish, she wasn't Lutheran either, so she was Roman Catholic. And it was somewhat of an issue, just like I suppose it might be from Catholic marrying a Lutheran of that family, but not that big a deal.
He was not Catholic and he was Finnish, but it wasn't an issue. I think he and my mother did not hit it off right away, but she came around, and finally she got to the point he could do no wrong. I think she liked him better than she liked me. But no, and his being Finnish didn't matter at all. And Catholic, we got married in the Catholic Church, but that wasn't an issue either. My in-laws were wonderful.
The Catholic Church had a rule that when you married in the Catholic Church, even if you didn't have to be Catholic to marry a Catholic, but you had to sign up that you'd have to bring your kids up Catholic. Well, I had my fingers crossed, I think, on that one.
Is this representative of attitudes in this area regarding such mixed marriages crossing ethnic groups and religions?
Yeah, I think very much it is, and probably this is one of the better stories. When you got earlier back in history, it was pretty difficult to have this type of mixed marriage.
They kind of said no, period?
Well, there used to be a thing that if two Finns met and they said, "Oh, my daughter's getting married," one of the very first questions was, "Onko hän suomalainen tai toiskielinen?" Was he a Finn or is he one who speaks another language? And if it was one who spoke another language, then the next hurdle was, what church? And there was a pretty big division in those days between the Catholics and Protestants, and so it was an issue. And over time, as more and more people it became acceptable, and people knew that they could, everyone was going to survive. Mm-hmm. Well, and just like today, it's the same old stories, it's just different groups.
Yeah, and it has kind of shifted or eased up. The clip references how oftentimes a particular religion is important to the identity of an ethnic group, like Catholic to Italians and Lutheran for Finns. Can you comment on the religious affiliations of the Europeans who settled in this area and what they brought with them, even the differences between the Finns?
Well, I would say this, that when all the ethnic groups came here, and they were all coming around the same time, from the end of the Civil War until the beginning of World War I was when most of them came. And as they came here, they didn't, I don't think in large, they were thinking about, I'm not going to be a Finn, or I'm not going to be a Slovenian anymore. I'm going to just go to America and everything's going to be American. It was economic. That was the first reason people came. It was an economic push and pull. And when they got here and they settled in, I thought, I can still be me. I can still have my religion. I can still speak my language. And people who have the same background as me, we will build these churches. And if you look in Calumet, for example, you'll see that it almost looks like the ethnic groups even competed. Let's put up as fine a church as we can to show that we're here and we're going to stay. And then the next generation, they were more assimilated, and they were pulling away from that. Sometimes it's the third generation that kind of pulls things back, and maybe it's sort of like a swinging of a pendulum, that you have the parents who can't give up their European ways, and then you have the children who have been Americanized, and then you have the grandchildren who kind of find that happy middle.
go back to.
Yeah, and I think that's been the case with religion too. That at first you had this idea that you were giving up everything, even heaven, and then after, who knows? We'll just figure this out as we go day by day.
My grandfather from my mother's side was a traveling minister. So it was like they went to the houses and did the services. And there was no established church, but it was the Apostolic Lutheran type. So it was the Lutheran portion that I grew up with.
And maybe that's the part that people don't realize, that your religious base had a lot to do with how you looked at the world. And in a Catholic structure, it's very hierarchy, excuse me. So you have everything is from the top down, whereas the Finnish Lutherans, in particular the Apostolic Lutherans, there was this very strong emphasis on the independence of a congregation, and even the independence of the member. That the member, you had the annual meeting where anyone could get up and talk.
I agree, yeah.
And they had these home services, and so it shapes our worldview when we start looking at how we fit into society, how we interact, how we perceive education, how we end up voting.
Right.
The whole thing is shaped sort of by these things that we think are just confined to our Sunday worship, but they're not. It's how we look at the structure of the world.
And I know growing up, there was all ages, from the grandparents on down to the newborn baby. They were in the church. They were involved every Sunday.
Oh, yeah. It didn't matter if your baby was colicky. You were there.
You were there. You had to be there. If you weren't, it was. And if someone was sick or whatever, people from the church were there to help. It seems like today people are left on the wayside. And we grew up with, you cared about whoever was a member of your religion.
Yeah, it was very much part of our community to be in the church, and now it's kind of an inconvenience if you don't conform to the person in the pew. Although I think that there's a shift now in many churches. If they hear a baby crying, they're thinking, "Oh yes, there's a baby here.
There's a young child here." This is true. This is true. At the Finnish-American Heritage Center, I know you put on a lot of activities and things like that. We're going to shift over to that now. What type of things are coming up? I know this is the 100th anniversary of Finland independence. Can you kind of let us know what's going to be going on in the near future for that?
This is a very busy year for us because we already always do Heikinpäivä in January. We do Finnish Independence Day in December, and in between we have all these other things. And this year we're really doing, in a big way, Juhannus, Midsummer, which is the 4th of July for Finland. For Finns, it's the big day. And the 25th or so of June is Juhannus every year, and or St. John's Day, and we're having a 3-day celebration in 4 communities. We decided that, we had to prove our sisu and make it as difficult as possible, so we picked almost the smallest communities we have, and we're having these little pop-up festivals there. And the ambassador of Finland is coming, and we're through Facebook and other means, we're getting a sense that people are coming to these events.
Very good. It's going to be like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday?
Friday it'll be at Hanka Homestead. We're celebrating this marvelous museum we have and drawing attention to it. Saturday it'll be at the Finnish-American Heritage Center, where we celebrate that there's this continuation through the archive and through the programs that are at Finlandia University. Saturday evening, it's out at Toivola at Aged Beach, where they have had a Juhannuskokko bonfire since the 1890s, and then on Sunday at Bruce Crossing for the 100th anniversary of the co-op.
Sounds like a great weekend. And we learned in our first episode that the Finnish-American Heritage Center houses a large collection of oral histories, as well as obviously much information on Finnish Americans who settled here. Can you tell our listeners what they have to do if they want to learn more about their heritage?
Well, we have a web page that has finding aids on it. It's part of Finlandia University's web pages, and otherwise just stop in and see us. We're open 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and we have genealogists, researchers, visitors come there all the time. We have the largest collection of Finnish-American archive materials of anyone.
And isn't that fireproof, weatherproof, moisture-proof?
Right. We have controls that control the humidity and temp, and we're keeping the ravages of time away from those materials as well as anyone can.
So all they have to do is call you, and they can make an appointment to come in. And
appointments are great, but we do take walk-ins too.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you've got all that stuff going on, just walk in and check it out. Okay, can you fill our audience in on some of the other cultural activities at the Finnish-American Heritage Center?
Well, we have a Finnish-American folk school, which is sort of in a slow rollout, and here's where we're teaching people very traditional things like Finnish boat making. We're going to have a log sauna builder come in the coming years. The lapikat, the leather boots with the curled toe, that'll be one of the workshops. Working with birch bark, working with straw, all sorts of traditional offerings that we wouldn't normally have.
So they can check our website or
check our website or give us a call about that as well, or tune into the Finnish-American Reporter, our newspaper, where it's a monthly newspaper in English for Finns across North America. And then in September we have a choir coming from Porvoo. Porvoo is Hancock's sister city. And this is a men's choir that's been in existence for many, many years, and they're making a special visit to their sister city and doing a concert in mid-September, or late September, the 30th of September.
Fantastic. They'll see that in the Finnish-American Reporter. Well, thank you, Jim, for being here. We really appreciate your time. And
I'm happy to be here. Thank
you. Thank you. Oh, and we need to say that the winner of the $20 gift certificate for last week was Jeannie St. Germain Blow of Chassel. And so be sure to fill in the survey at www.rightstartup.org/yourstory for next week, and we will be pulling out a winner. And also, Sarah Lofty Chem wanted to thank all the people who took part in the event that took place last week. She specifically wanted to thank Oren Tikkanen and Thimbleberry Band, as well as the Backroom Boys Jazz Band, Kay Seppala's Givayat Finnish Folk Dancers, and the screening of the film that was there, and all the people that showed up. Sarah Lofty, the Cham, couldn't be here today, but she'll be back next week. And this is Linda Graham saying thank you so much for tuning in. And we do have a short little clip of what's going to be on next week.
I feel the UP is a great place to raise a family, and hopefully there'll be more jobs that people would be able to stay around here. Even at my age, we went to Milwaukee to work on Rambler cars. The pay was double what we were making here, but to live in a city was not my cup of tea, because I'm a Youper and I'm proud of it. I'm a proud veteran, a proud American, and a proud Youper.
So be sure to tune in next week to hear all about the UP culture and pride as expressed through the Your Story videos. Your Story brought to you by Right Start UP. Linda Graham saying tune in next week. Thank you.